introduce our speaker, and then Brother Jim will come and lead us as we sing one additional song. We are happy to have Dr. Don Whitney with us for many years as pastor in Glen Ellen, Illinois, and has just recently gone to Midwestern Seminary to be on the faculty, dealing in the area of spiritual formations and spiritual life. A friend of mine for several years, and we've enjoyed a great deal of fellowship together. He has written what I consider to be a classic book on Christian disciplines. Those of you who read in those areas will know that Richard Foster has done some significant work in that area over the last several years. But Foster, if I'm not mistaken, basically comes out of a Quaker background. A lot of emphasis he gives to areas of meditation and these types of things is based on imagination and visualization. I certainly would not call him a New Ager, but it's almost in that vein of things. And so for those of us a more orthodox view of things, it was difficult to assimilate those books and to get the best out of them. Then Don has come along from a Reformed Baptist perspective and has written a marvelous book on these basic disciplines of the Christian life. And I commend that to you. After the session tonight, we have a few of those left. I'm looking at 6 of them, and have a little signing time to let him sign those books. And also Dr. Nettles, we didn't have any to sign. They're all gone, but you've got one you want him to sign. I'm sure he'd be happy to do that. We'll do that after the service tonight. But it's a classic book, and I thank God for it. And I thank God for Don. I will just tell one little anecdote, and then we'll sing. A few years ago, Brother Don spoke at the Pastors' Conference of the Illinois Baptist State Association, our state convention. And in that particular session, it was a pretty typical Baptist Pastors' Conference fare of bluster and braggadocio. You know, that's what we do to each other a lot of times in those meetings. And then Don got up and spoke about the fact that our ministry is based on holiness and correct doctrine out of the pastors. And it was interesting to me that the other two speakers, when they finished, were received with enthusiastic and vibrant applause. But when Don finished, there was no applause. Until the moderator began to applaud, got up, and then everybody rather politely applauded. And he did not tell us what we wanted to hear. And I told him later that I thought it took great courage in that context and in that environment to preach that message. He's a man of integrity, a man who loves the Lord. And he'll bless us tonight as he comes to speak to us. So Don, we're glad you're here. We're thankful that you're able to come and be a part of our meeting. And Jim will lead us in one other hymn, and then Don will come and speak to us.
Number 486 in your hymnal, Lord, Here Am I. This is based on Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 8. When we think of the themes, the sovereignty of God and evangelism, our responsibility to evangelize and share the gospel, be ready and willing to say yes to the Lord, is just as great. That's what this song is about. Lord, here am I.
Teach me of His shine.
Well, it's a great privilege to be here. And I'm so glad this conference has come off. I'm really glad this has been done. And I'm grateful for the steering committee that has pulled this together and for all the work that has gone into this. And I'm grateful to this church for hosting this conference and allowing us to come. This is something that I hope that we could do for a long, long time. And this church has helped make it possible. So, Pastor, thank you. And thank you to the members of this church. And thanks again to the committee that has pulled this together. This is just a great dream come true, something we've anticipated for a long time. There's one other conference like this. It's on a regional basis. That's down in the Southwest, in El Paso or somewhere, I think, isn't it? Or somewhere. Love it. And so it's great that we have one in our area now. I bring greetings to you from Dr. Coppinger at Western. The Lord is doing great things there. And we have 2 trustees here, including the pastor of this church. And at least one of them has to leave tonight to go back and interview 4 new faculty members tomorrow. And so the Lord is at work there, and I hope He will send us some students. Take your Bibles, please, and turn to John chapter 4, verse 35, to the text that's been assigned to me. John chapter 4 and verse 35. In our country's second Great Awakening, which was early in the decades of the 1800s, one of the great evangelists of the time and men used of God was a man named Asahel Nettleton. He frequently saw scenes like I'm about to read, where God gave great power to the gospel as it was preached, and many people would be converted. Dramatic results, particularly in terms of people inquiring afterwards, what must I do to be saved? On April 24th, 1820, he was preaching in Nassau, New York, which is a few miles from Albany. And one woman was converted during the course of the message, and he talks about her in a moment, in a modern biography that's called God Sent Revival. Nettleton describes this scene after his sermon. No sooner had I stepped from the stage than she came near, taking her husband by the hand, and urged him to come to Christ. It was like a two-edged sword. It pierced him to the heart. At this moment, the anxious ones assembled around me and took me, some by the hand, some by the arm, and some by the coat, exclaiming, "Don't leave us! Don't leave us! What shall we do?" Nearly the whole congregation tarried. Those who could not come near stood, some on the seats, some on the sides of the pews, to hear and to see. Now, I love to hear a response to the gospel like that. I love to read those kind of things. I love to read of 3,000 people being converted on the day of Pentecost. I love reading the stories of the Great Awakenings, and I glory in the response to the gospel we hear when Whitfield preached, or the Tennants, or when Jonathan Edwards, or Spurgeon, or people such as this preached. And I believe those kinds of things really happened, that these aren't made up. I believe these were authentic harvests that God gave. And I further believe that God is going to send days like that again. And I believe we will see times in the future where there will be another great day of spiritual harvest. But you know what my difficulty is? My difficulty is believing that we're going to see them right now. And this is exactly the problem Jesus addressed in John chapter 4, the story of the sermon, of the conversation with the woman at the well of Samaria. And he says to his disciples in the midst of that, "Do you not say, there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, that they are white unto harvest." I want to emphasize 2 ideas for this verse, and the first one is this. Many Christians have what I call the not now view about expecting to see people converted to faith in Christ. Many people have the not now view about expecting to see people converted to faith in Jesus Christ. Jesus said, "Do you not say there are yet 4 months, then comes the harvest?" I want to say 2 things about the not now view. First of all, the not now view believes God has saved many people in the past and will again in the future, but not now. See, the disciples had seen Jesus do great things down in Jerusalem, and they had seen people converted down there. And now they're in transit up to Galilee, and they are very optimistic at this point about what God is going to do through Jesus and about the kingdom coming on earth. And they are expectant of great things to happen in the future. But they're not expecting anything to happen right now. Not where they are. Not right now, but they're in Samaria. Well, the Jews and Samaritans, as you probably know, have one of the all-time racial hatreds. After King David came Solomon. After Solomon, the kingdom was divided. 10 tribes to the north became Israel, Judah in the south. And Israel then was captured in 722 BC. 27,000 people were taken away from the northern part. And 27,000 or so were shipped in. And the result of that was that idolatry of those people who came in became enculturated. It just became part of the culture in that part of the country. 150 years or so later, in 586 BC, Judah was captured. They go to Babylon. 70 years later, as you know, they come back. The remnant begins to return. They start rebuilding the temple. They're in Jerusalem. And as they do, these people from the north, who had idolatry now enculturated in there because they weren't Jews. They came in. There had been some half-breeding marriages and so forth in there. And these people came down as they started building the temple. They said, "We want to help." And they said, "No dice. We want nothing of you building this temple. This is for the people of God to build. You are idolaters. We want nothing of you to help us." So they go back and they build their own temple on the mountain where they believe Abraham sacrificed or offered Isaac. Now, during the 400 years between Malachi and Matthew, we call it the intertestamental period, the high priest of the Jews, John Hyrcanus, came with an army and destroyed that temple that they built up on that mountain. Well, you can imagine what kind of attitude was resulting as part of that. There's still an attitude there today with bombing and everything else. It was payback time. And so there were things back and forth. And in fact, between AD 6 and 7, possibly at the very same Passover where Jesus stayed as a young man to ask questions of the priests, possibly at the very same Passover, some Samaritans came south and they scattered bones in the temple to show their disrespect and to show their hatred of the Jews and of their site of the temple. Well, so the disciples weren't thinking about a harvest there in Samaria. These were the kind of people who hated the Jews, that hated the temple. Great racial hatred. And Jesus had done some great things down in Jerusalem. He's going to do some great things up here in Galilee, but not here. Not here. The great British Baptist preacher in London of the last century, you know, pretty soon we won't be able to say the last century anymore. We'll refer to Spurgeon. He exposed the same kind of unbelief when he said, "Many unbelieving Christians have a very large stock of reasons for not expecting to see many conversions. They suppose that any present manifestation of divine power in connection with the truth is not to be expected. They read the history of past ages and they wonder. Sometimes, when their eye is sufficiently clear, they look forward with some hope of repetition of these scenes in future years. That is to say, when they themselves are dead and buried. And a new age shall come upon the world. But as to God working any wonders in the world now, as to the conversion of thousands now, they do not expect it. And if it were to happen, they would be surprised and beyond all measure astonished. They are forever dwelling in the past, are seeking to roost in the future. But as for now seeing God's arm made bare, now setting to the work of the conversion of men, now expecting that God will win hearts into himself, they are not brought up to this mark yet. Their common reason for expecting nothing now is this, that there are yet 4 months and then cometh harvest. They say, this is not the time. We must have patience. We must wait. This is not the man. This is not the hour. This is not the place. We must wait till, under other circumstances, other men being given, we look for grander results. We must not expect them now. There are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Now, Calvinistic ministers are especially prone to this problem, I think. We read of the many conversions given to Spurgeon and to Edwards and to Whitfield and to Richard Baxter, and we long for the purity of doctrine that these men had and that they may have developed in Kidderminster, the places where they taught, and the practice, the purity of the practice that seems to be theirs as we look back with the lens of history. And we look ahead, and we believe that God is going to send revival again, and another Reformation may come, and that we will again see dramatic harvest in response to the gospel, as these men saw. But that's yet 4 months, and then comes harvest. As for our own day, even though we believe that these things happened in the past, and we really believe it's coming in the future, as for our own day, and our own church, and our own denomination, and our own town, not now. Not now. God has done it in the past, he'll do it in the future, but not now. Second thing about the not now view is this. It believes that God only sends special harvest times and not a constant harvest. Only special harvest times and not a constant. Some think that Jesus wasn't saying that there will always be a ready harvest. They think he was saying there will be occasional special harvest like the one you're about to see now as the Samaritans are lining up and coming out of town and coming to hear the gospel as a result of the woman going into town and telling them that they've seen this man. And we know by history and experience that there are such things as that. We know that sometimes there are harvests that are greater than others. We see them in just about every church. We see them in history. And sometimes they're preceded by long periods of sowing and reaping and praying, sowing and watering and praying before there's the reaping. Samuel Stoddard, who was the grandfather of Jonathan Edwards, and the man Jonathan Edwards came to assist in Northampton. And he was only there a short time before his grandfather died. His grandfather Stoddard talked about periods of harvest. If you read Ian Burry's biography of Jonathan Edwards, he writes of Edwards describing his grandfather's ministry. He says this: he referred to 5 periods of special spiritual awakenings. 5 harvests was his grandfather's phrase, which saw the conversion of many souls. In each of these times, writes Edwards, I have heard my grandfather say the greater part of the young people in the town seem to be mainly concerned with their eternal salvation. So we know there are times of special harvest. Carey saw them on the mission field. That Arm Judson, they saw these things on the pioneer mission field. Well, they would be there for 7 years. Then came the harvest. But Jesus doesn't seem to be teaching here about taking advantage of a unique opportunity. He doesn't say, lift up your eyes and look on the fields because now's the time of special harvest. I mean, you don't have to tell a minister to do that. If people are lining up to hear the gospel, you don't have to tell them, take advantage of that. He's teaching us that the not now view is not the right view. He wants us to come to the attitude that the fields, that all fields, and if you look in the verse that it says the fields, it's plural. All the fields are always white for harvest. There's a ready harvest always. Now, there will be times when we'll see more of a harvest than at other times. But the problem is usually we don't think that they're any time. And the problem, see, is not with the harvest. The problem is with our need of harvest. The problem is not with the harvest. Jesus said, lift up your eyes. Look on the harvest. The fields are white. Too often our view is that our field, whether it's a person, whether it's a church or a church field, an area, is not ready for the gospel. But the problem is not with the gospel. The problem is with our eyes. The not now view is the wrong view. And here's the second thing. God wants us to have the right now view about expecting to see people converted to faith in Jesus Christ. He wants us to have the right now view. Not the not now view, but the right now view. Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes, look on the fields, that they are, present tense, they are ready, that they're white for harvest. And I want to say 2 things about the right now view. First of all, the right now view requires you to lift up your eyes and look on the fields, Jesus said. He wanted his disciples to lift up their eyes, to look from the material plane on the spiritual plane. Lift them up, lift them up. Look! See from God's perspective. See things differently. He's not talking about crops. He's talking about the Samaritans as they're coming out of the village. Leon Morris, a commentator, talks about, he quotes a man named H.B. Morton, who wrote many years ago from the very same spot, this well. And he said, as I sat by Jacob's well, a crowd of Arabs came along the road from the direction in which Jesus was looking. And I saw their white garments shining in the sun. Surely Jesus was speaking not of the earthly, but of the heavenly harvest. And as he spoke, I think it was likely that he pointed along the road where the Samaritans in their white robes were, assembling to hear his words. So lift up your eyes and look on the fields means to look on all fields, your field. Field where you live and work for Christ with spiritual eyesight, and to see that the harvest is ready right now. That there are people that God can have ready right now. On every field, every person, every place, he wants us to see each one of them. Every church, every person is ready. They may not be ready, but our job is to see them as ready. Where God may be ready to convert someone right now. And of course, you may discover after giving them the gospel that they're not ready. Jesus talks about this as casting pearls before swine. You give something that's valuable to someone who can't appreciate it. You give someone the gospel and discover they don't appreciate it. They don't understand it yet. But you don't know that until you get it. You don't know that they're not ready until you give them the gospel. Who would have thought the Samaritans were ready? We need the right now view. And until a person proves otherwise, we are to assume that they are ready right now. Brother R.F. Gates was in our church back in March of 1985. And he said two words in a sermon I've never forgotten since then. He said, think evangelism. He said, wherever you go, whoever you meet, think evangelism. I remember it like it was yesterday. He said, if you go to the grocery store to get some cornflakes, think evangelism. Wherever you are, think evangelism. Remember, if you go to the gas station, go to the bank, whoever you see, think evangelism. That's what Jesus is saying. Lift up your eyes, look on the fields. They are ready. They are white for harvest. And that among them somewhere, God has some people ready, but you'll never know until you give them the gospel. And if you assume that they're not ready, you'll never see them more. Think evangelism. Too often, like the disciples, we're only thinking on the material plane. And we're not seeing from the spiritual plane of possibility. I was guilty of that during the convention last year in Atlanta. A very dear friend had died, former deacon chairman. He had retired down in Dallas. And after only about 4 hours sleep, I had to leave Atlanta very early in the morning during the convention to fly to Dallas to do this funeral. And after it was over, hurried back to the airport. My flight was to be at 6:30. As soon as I got checked in, I discovered it had been delayed. I hate that when it happens. Knock yourself out to get to the airport, you know it's delayed. Well, we waited for about an hour, it's delayed again. Waited about an hour, it's delayed again. So by this time, there was another flight going out of Dallas to Atlanta that was scheduled to leave before the flight I was booked on was to leave. So I changed over. Then it was delayed. And then it was delayed. And while I'm sitting there waiting to listen to delay, my other plane takes off. And at 11 o'clock, I'm still sitting there in Dallas, and I'm so tired. I'm just so tired. I said, Lord, I just... When we finally got on the airplane, I knew because of the weather and the way people have been changing, every seat would be taken. And I had a seat against the window, and I said, Lord, I just want to sleep. I really need to sleep. And if I can't sleep, at least let me read. And last, the Lord kind of broke through the fog as though, hello, do you think there might be a purpose for this? You think it's possible that this is not escape my providence? There might be a purpose for it. So right in the seat to me, you know, I'm sitting there and I was thinking, you remember that Far Side cartoon where this guy is sitting in the middle seat and there's this kind of nerdy looking guy on one side and he's thinking in his mind, why do I always have to sit next to some weirdo? And there's a vacant seat next to him, the only one left on the plane, and you see this real weird guy coming down the aisle, you know, and that's going to be the one he's thinking it's this guy. And so I'm thinking that there's one seat left on the plane. And so this woman comes and sits down. And I said, okay, Lord, if you want me to witness to it, if you will give me an open door, then I'll go through. You know, with all the compassion and evangelistic zeal in my heart, Lord, if you give me a clear opening, then I'll witness. Well, as she got settled, and she had a book on her lap, and it opened this way, and I noticed right off that the cover was written in Hebrew. Hebrew. And so I'm trying to go through my alphabet, you know, trying to remember anything I can from my Hebrew. And I was looking at the name of the author up there, and I pieced together some things, and I said, does that say the author's name is Amos something or other? She said, yes, it does. How do you know Hebrew? I said, well, I studied it for a year at one time. Oh, really? And I got to talk to Penina. And she was a 45-year-old architect, had her own very successful architectural firm in San Diego, and she had changed planes in Dallas, and she was going to Atlanta for a convention. And all the way through the rest of the night, I got to talk to her about Christ, about the cross, about the resurrection. There was nothing I wanted to say to her I didn't get the opportunity to say. But it was only after I lifted up my eyes and looked on the spiritual plane and said, the fields are white unto harvest, maybe there's an opportunity for someone who is ready to hear the gospel. Lift up your eyes, Jesus said, and look. Look beyond the material plane. Maybe that'll happen for you at something like Vacation Bible School. It hit me. I lifted up my eyes and I said, there are unconverted children all over this building. And there are helpers. A lot of teenagers are helping that are unconverted. And I said, lift up your eyes and look. I'm just sitting in there kind of going in for the opening assembly, you know, and there are kids for hours all over the building. And so I just got convicted to bring some of them in, some of the helpers, some of the children, all during the time of Vacation Bible School, all week long. and talk to them about their soul. Lift up your eyes and look. Think evangelism. What use are sermons, sacraments, and schools, wrote Horatius Bonar in his Wise Words to Winners of Souls, a great book. It's back in the bookstore. You can read it in half an hour. What use are sermons, sacraments, and schools if souls are left to perish? What good does our theology do if we don't share the gospel with people? What are some of the other fields we need to look at with spiritual eyesight? Look on evangelistically. Well, notice what Jesus did here in this passage. He looked on the unloved. Nobody loved this woman. The men didn't love her. They only used her. The other women in Samaria didn't love her. That's why she was out there by herself in the heat of the day, drawing water instead of when all the other women came out there as a group and did it. Who in your life is unloved? Who is it in your church field, in your family, in your neighborhood is unloved? And you never thought of them as being ready right now. You never had the right now view toward these people. You never thought they'd be ready for the gospel any more than you would have thought this woman was ready. But now you can think of them evangelistically because you've got the right now view toward unloved people. Jesus also looked upon the unlikely. Nobody was more unlikely than this woman and the Samaritans to hear the gospel. For starters, she was a woman. You probably know that rabbis in those days wouldn't be seen talking with a woman in public, even with one of their own wife, even with their wife or one of their own daughters, lest it be misconstrued. Somebody who might not know them would see the rabbi talking to the woman and get the wrong idea. So they were so concerned about that they wouldn't even speak with a woman in public, even if it was their wife or their daughter. There was a group even known as the Bloody Pharisees. I love this. They wouldn't even look on a woman in public. So if they're walking down the street, if it's market day, market is full of people. If there were women there, they would close their eyes. And so as a result, they were always bumping into buildings and the corners of houses and things and got all bloody. They were called the Bloody Pharisees. But worse than that, not only she's a woman, she was an immoral woman. Who would have thought she would be ready to hear the gospel? And on top of that, she was a Samaritan woman. And all of these people were Samaritans. Who would have thought that they were ready right now? These are the people who hate us. These are the people who hate what we believe. These are the people who think the temple ruins up on that mountain is right. And they came to throw bones in our temple. Who would think they're ready? They're the most unlikely people in the world to be ready to follow Christ. But Jesus said, lift up your eyes and look. Look from God's perspective, from the spiritual perspective. As you lift up your eyes, who is unlikely in your field to ever hear the gospel? Because of their political views, maybe. Because of their views on homosexuality. Because of their views on abortion. Because of their views on the upcoming presidential election. It's unlikely that other Christians are going to ever share the gospel with them. Because they wouldn't be interested in the gospel. They wouldn't have those views if they were interested in the gospel, so they're not ready. Jesus says, lift up your eyes and knock. Have the right now view. He looked not only on the unloved and the unlikely, but on the unprepared. Who would have thought these Samaritans were prepared to hear the gospel? Who would have thought they were ready to come to Christ and hear a Jewish rabbi? The predecessor of Martin Lloyd-Jones at Westminster Chapel in London was G. Campbell Morgan. He said on this verse, if those disciples had been appointed a commission of inquiry as to the possibilities of Christian enterprise in Samaria, I know exactly the resolution they would have passed. The resolution would have been, Samaria unquestionably needs our Master's message. But it is not ready for it. There must first be plowing, then sowing, and then waiting. It is needed, but it is not ready. But Jesus said, lift up your eyes and look. They are ready right now. They're unloved, they're unlikely, they're unprepared, but they're ready. Right now. They don't look like it, but they're ready. Who do you know is in one of these categories? Who do you know is unloved, is unlikely, is unprepared, and they don't look like they're ready, but they could be ready right now? And you know why we can believe that? Do you know why we can believe that regardless of background, they may have never been to church, regardless of any preparation, there's been no recent crisis in their life, there's been no evident hunger recently in their life. You know why we can believe in the right now view? Because of the power of God, that's why. Because in the power of God, He is the one who opens people's eyes. He's the one who gives a readiness, even a sudden readiness, to people who have been unprepared, unconcerned, uninterested, and with no background. In an instant, He can give them a heart for something they've never in their lives had a taste of. And in one moment, He can take out that heart of stone and put in the heart of flesh and give them the willingness to believe, even though they've never shown one bit of evidence for it up until that moment. Even up until that moment, they've hated you and everything you and your church have stood for. Right now, they might be ready. Now, the second thing about the right now view is this. It requires that you believe that the fields are white for harvest, even when you see very few conversions. Even when you have seen very few people converted, even if you're seeing no one come to Christ now through your own witness or through your ministry, you believe in the right now view still yet. How can we do that? When we're seeing very few converted right now, how can we have the right now view and think many people are ready? Well, look at some of the current things in our culture. Look at the current interest in angels. A lot of best-selling books on angels have been published. There are entire stores devoted to the subject of angels. I don't see Pat Stewart's head shining in here from here, but Pat is in St. Charles, Illinois. There's a whole store in his town just on angels. There are mail-order catalogs. I've got some things about them just for gizmos about angels. I saw a bumper sticker at Walmart the other day that said, "Protected by angels." People are interested in the supernatural. Look at the interest, secondly, in near-death experiences. Public television's had programs in the last year on near-death experiences. The book Embraced by the Light, with its Mormon author, has been a bestseller for weeks. Hottest thing going in the publishing business for a while. USA Today has had numerous articles on near-death experiences in the past few months. People are interested in what's beyond the veil of death. Look at the interest in spirituality in our culture right now. Yesterday's USA Today, front page. Magic merchandise has consumers under spell. There's magic in the air. Suddenly it seems there's a magic potion on the market for every area of life, from spells to boost your career to charms to attract a lover. What's behind all this? Stuart Vyse, Associate Professor of Psychology at Connecticut College, believes it's something deeper. He says institutions such as religions, government, and science professionals, especially physicians, are being cast aside. People are seeking other ways of conceptualizing the world. There's a real fascination with things magical and New Age. Postmodernism for you right there. But here's all these things you can order, these potions and charms and magic tricks and all these kinds of things. People are interested in the supernatural, the spiritual. Well, so what, you might think? That's a wrong kind of interest. This is not what we're looking for. We're not pushing this kind of stuff. What does this have to do with fields being white for harvest? Well, Spurgeon spoke about this kind of interest. He compared this interest with angels and near-death experiences and spirituality. He compared it to spiritual thorns. He said that's an interest in spirituality, spiritual thorns. But then he said, if I were going to take a farm, I would sooner have taken one that was overgrown with thistle than one that grew nothing at all. And it's better to lay hold of a man who really does think about something than one who thinks about nothing at all. I mean, if you want to buy a farm, would you rather have one out here in Missouri that's covered up with thorns or one in the Sahara Desert? And that's what he's saying. At least people have some interest in things like after death. They're not just some couch potato watching soap operas. At least they have some concern about things spiritual, and we can plug right into that. There is a readiness for harvest that we need to lift up our eyes and see. And the right now view requires us to look on the fields that they are ready for harvest, even when you see very few people converted. Most of us, myself included, know too well the grim reality that you can labor faithfully for a long time and see few people converted. Hosea, do you realize that Hosea prophesied in Israel for 70 years? Isaiah for 50 years. And the longer they preached, the worse it got. But both of them had reason to pray the prayer of Isaiah. Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Isaiah 53, Jeff. 50 years, 70 years, knowing they're preaching God's Word, having experiences with God that confirmed that He was with them, He was putting words in their mouths, said, but Lord, who's believed our report? J.I. Packer, in his great book, A Quest for Godliness, which I'm requiring students to read in one of my classes, about the beliefs and practices of Puritans. He writes about one of the early Puritan preachers named Richard Greenham. Richard Greenham was pastor at Dry Drayton. It was dry. Dry Drayton, 7 miles from Cambridge from 1570 to 1590. He worked extremely hard. Now listen to this. You're talking about a faithful laborer for the gospel. He rose daily at 4. And each Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, 4 times, he preached a sermon at daybreak. to catch his flock before they dispersed into the fields. Then on Sunday he preached twice. And in addition, catechized the children of the parish each Sunday evening and Thursday morning. Mornings he studied, afternoons he visited the sick or walked out into the fields to confer with his neighbors as they were at plow. In his preaching, Henry Holland, his biographer, tells us, he was so earnest and took such extraordinary pains that his shirt would usually be as wet with sweating as if he'd been drenched with water, so that he was forced, as soon as he came out of the pulpit, to shift himself and change his clothes. He was a pastoral counselor of uncommon skill. His friends hoped he would write a book on the art of counseling, but he never did. In a letter to his bishop, he described his ministry as, quote, preaching Christ crucified unto myself and country people. Yet, says his biographer, for all his godliness, insight, evangelical message, and hard work, his ministry was virtually fruitless. Others outside his parish blessed him, but not his own people. Greenham had pastures green, but flocks full lean, was a little rhyme that went round among the godly. And he wrote this, I perceive no good wrought by my ministry on any but one family. That's what he told his successor. 20 years, preaching 6 sermons a week, getting up at 4 in the morning, walking with his people in the afternoon, catechizing the children twice a week. And he said, I've done this for 20 years, and I'm convinced it's done no good except on one family. Packer finishes, in rural England in Greenham's day, there was much fallow ground to be broken up. It was a time for sowing, but the reaping time was still in the future. Many of you men feel as though you've had ministers like that. You may feel as though you're one of those right now. It is possible to labor faithfully for a long time and still see few conversions, and yet we must lift up our eyes and look and believe the fields are white unto harvest. Now, another who ministered quite a bit later, several miles away in Cambridge, was Charles Simeon, and he knew a lot of what Greenham experienced. For the first 12 years, think about that. If you haven't been at your present place 12 years, think about what 12 years is like. For 12 years, he was so opposed that those who rented the pews, in those days, you rented a pew, they had little doors on them, you had the key, and that's how the minister was paid. You paid to the church, that meant you got a seat. You got to sit down. Those who hated him locked their pews so no one else could sit in it. They didn't come. They locked the pew and took away the key so no one else. So anyone who wanted to come hear Charles Simeon had to stand for 12 years. And he eventually stayed and had a profitable ministry for 50 years there. But Simeon said on this text in John 4 about those who don't see a harvest, he said, the Lord of the harvest will not suffer any one of his laborers to work for naught. In the very work itself he shall find a rich reward. The Apostle Paul put it this way, 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. It is not in vain. That's why Richard Greenham could preach so faithfully for so long, because he believed the fields are ripe unto harvest. He could stay at it because he believed the power of God could come at any time. I've compared it to sharing the gospel is like giving out lightning rods in a thunderstorm. You don't know who the power, here's one for you, here's one for you, here's one for you. And I don't know which one the power of God's going to strike, but I know when the power of God comes, I know where it's going to strike. It's going to strike the gospel. And I may hand out 1,000 lightning rods before the power comes, but when it comes, it's going to strike the gospel. So Greenham kept sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ faithfully because he believed in the power of God. People could be ready even though they showed no evidence of being ready. Even when we see few conversions, even when we believe God has put us in a groundbreaking reformational kind of ministry like Richard Greenham, who laid a foundation that others came in on and harvested, still we must see with spiritual eyes that the fields are white for harvest. And yet while it's true that faithful men can labor a long time without conversions, one of those who is very familiar with Greenham's life was Spurgeon. And he said, if I never won souls, I would sigh till I did. I would break my heart over them if I could not break their hearts. Though I can understand the possibility of an earnest sower never reaping, I cannot understand the possibility of an earnest sower being content not to reap. I cannot comprehend any one of you Christian people trying to win souls and not having results and being satisfied without results. Now I want to ask 4 questions. In conclusion. First of all, will you lift up your eyes and look on the fields and believe that they are white with harvest? That is the clear call. Jesus said, lift up your eyes and look that the fields are white with harvest. Will you do that? Will you look at your family and your church and your field and your ministry and say, God, I can't see it, but by faith I believe that they are white for harvest. Because all it takes is one drop of the whiteness of God's power and they're white and they're ready. They don't look like it. They may never give any indication about it. But from the moment I start a sentence, when their heart is hard until the time I finish the sentence, their heart may be changed by the power of God. Second, as you lift up your eyes and look on the fields, do you sense the call of God to be a full-time harvester? The call of God may be to see the fields as ready and ripe and needing a laborer to be sent forth into the harvest. And maybe He's saying, come follow me in the harvest. Third question is, are you possibly sensing the call of God to be a missionary harvester? You want to go to a place where people are like they were the Samaritans in this passage? There are places on the mission field that's like that. I've gone to places like that, and while I'm there I'm thinking, what am I doing back, where I am? When I see more people converted in a week than I'll see in 5 years. I remember one time we were in Brazil, and we had meetings such that we would have home meetings scheduled all day long. And then we had meetings in the church when I preached. And I'd never seen anything like this before, but my wife, Kathy, was with women's meetings all day long for a whole week. She never once shared the gospel all week long where someone wasn't genuinely converted, evidently. I'm not talking about just giving, the 4 spiritual flaws and then asking somebody to raise their hand. But I'm talking about giving the gospel thoroughly, to talk about repentance, and to talk about the lordship of Christ, and to talk about turning from sin, and to give everything you want to say about the gospel, and to count the cost of following Christ, and seeing someone every time, all day long, for a whole week, people come to Christ. We were in the mission field in Kenya in August of 1989. Not only did we talk to people who never heard of Jesus, we talked with one woman, she was in her 80s, her name was Kambua. She had never heard of God before. You're talking about starting from scratch now. You don't start with God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. Who is God? What's God? But people were anxious to hear what we had to say. And some of it was, first white person that some of these little children had ever seen. They were terrified. There was cultural interest there, but we were in Sweden. And you talk about a place cold and hard, and yet we got to go into the high schools and give our testimony and then say, what questions do you have? This was one of the greatest experiences of my life, was in Sweden, of all places, which generally when we went out and preached at night, there was very little interest in the gospel. But these kids were firing up questions like, well, if there's really God, why is He letting all these people starve to death in Ethiopia? And if there's really God, what about this? What about this? And what about that? Man, I loved it. It was just great to feel all these questions and say, and come back with the gospel. And to take advantage of that interest, even though they might have been questions, but they were real questions. But well, if this is so, then why is this? The fields are white in the harvest. Last question. As you lift up your eyes and look on the fields, will you think evangelism? Will you think evangelism? Now, people who are fairly new to the doctrines of grace can be reluctant toward evangelism sometimes because they tend to associate evangelism with a type of message and a type of methodology that they now reject. And so they think, if that's evangelism, I don't want anything to do with it. Now, they don't think about it that clearly, but they associate evangelism with what they themselves and others have done and said in the past. And they don't believe that way anymore, and they can't believe that in manipulating people like that anymore. And they can't believe in being so man-centered in their view of the gospel anymore. And now that they're God-centered in their presentation of the gospel, they believe that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation. And salvation is of the Lord and not of the will of man. It is not a man who wills or runs, but a God who has mercy. Sometimes they can be less evangelistic, and that's wrong. For Jesus said, lift up your eyes, look on the fields that they are white in the harvest. The greatest of Puritan theologians, John Owen, said, ministers are seldom honored with success unless they are continually aiming at the winning of souls. That was the greatest Puritan theologian we had. Unless we're continually aiming at the conversion of sinners. Well, it's interesting in this passage, everyone was ready. Everyone was ready. Jesus was ready. And he said later, man, it's my meat, my drink. I love this. Nothing feeds my soul like sharing the gospel. Jesus was ready. The woman was ready. The Samaritans were ready. You never could have told that in advance. Everybody was ready. But the messengers. Everybody was ready but the followers of Jesus. Everybody was ready but the disciples. What about you? Lift up your eyes and look on the fields. They are white and harvest. Let's pray. Father, I think most of us need to repent, myself included. As I sit on an airplane and I look at people and I think, they're not ready. They're not interested. I look at the people I live around, they're the same old folks. They don't seem to have changed, so how can they be ready? Father, forgive me for doubting your power. Forgive me for looking at things from an earthly perspective and not looking upon people in terms of what the power of God can do. Father, grant us the grace to be more faithful in sharing the gospel and handing out those lightning rods in a thunderstorm. To believe that the power of God can strike at any moment, even to those that are the least concerned. Because it is not man who wills, or man who runs, but God who has mercy. Oh God, have mercy on our sharing of the gospel. May we see those times of harvest that Spurgeon saw in the tabernacle, that Edwards saw in the Great Awakening in Whitfield, that Nettleton saw in Nassau, New York. Oh God, may we see those kinds of harvests right now, right where we are. In Jesus' name, and for your glory.